Hello. So, to keep myself occupied while we wait for the changes from the PTB to hit live branch, one example being that Waystone Refresh being upped to the cost of 2,000 marks for the first refresh. I cannot wait for that, personally. I ended up asking my last video with Nano Tyrannus, or aka a Baby Rex, if anybody would like a updated guide to replay mode, in terms of how all of the settings work, a few of the main problems you might run into with replay mode and how you can work around them, like some of the bugs, and lastly, a bunch of the examples putting into practice what I've been talking about in how everything works. On the side, I have been playing a couple of other games. I have actually been working on a little playthrough of The Outer Wilds, and I really am looking forward to actually editing that and getting through that again.
Oh god, I think I'm...
Along with then also, I've been kind of addicted to Warframe again, and then also there's some other stuff like Helldivers, which has been pretty fun. Either way, it's all stuff that has kept me occupied while I wait for the next Path of Titans update to hit live branch. But, before I get onto a whole ramble, as I usually do, let's get onto it, shall we? And with that out of the way, I hope you all enjoy.
Oh, mate!
So, let's start up. How do you actually start a replay? Well, it's quite simple. You can do this either in-game or on the main menu. You go into settings, go over to controls, you scroll down a little bit until you find record replay, and then you can bind that to whatever you want. For me, I like to put L1 and right on my D-pad because I'm on a PlayStation. Whatever works out for you, tinker with it, whatever you feel comfortable with. But if you are on PC, the default is the letter U. So then whenever you're in game, you pick your dino, whatever you want to do, and, well, you're in game, you hit your keybind for it. As I said before, mine was L1 and right on my D-pad. Do a little bit of moving around, it's capturing what I'm doing right here. And then you can end that by hitting the same button again, or if you log out of this playable or die on this playable, it'll stop the replay, capturing everything that happened up until you either left the game or died. If you like as well, you can also go into gameplay on the settings tab, go all the way down, and you've got settings for, whatever you want to choose for this right here. Whether you want replay to, load faster, I don't know what real effect that has. You can have a recording indicator, which whenever you actually start a replay recording, then it'll show you up in the top right with a little blinking light saying recording. And there did also used to be a setting to automatically start the recording whenever you just got onto a playable, but I guess they disabled that for some reason. And then you can also set it to just automatically delete the recordings after, a set amount of time, whatever you choose. But then after you've logged out of the server, or, your character's died, it'll automatically start processing so that the replay is being saved and then you can access it. Okay, I'm gonna have to delete some replays. This is taking forever to load up. What the hell? Manage replays. So I ended up deleting a bunch of the replays, and that should make it, load up a bunch of my replays that I have here a lot quicker. So, this is the Anno clip that I ended up hitting on replay mode earlier. And so, we just load it up, and then we can do what we wanted to do with it. Whether we want to grab a little screenshot, or, I don't know, make a funny little clip of whatever happened in the replay. You do what you like. But in particular, I'll go over a couple of the simple little settings that don't really, they're more like quality of life. Like every so often, whenever you click out of the menu, you see this little HUD has been hidden thing down here. You can just click up here in the top left, show pop-ups when HUD is hidden, or show HUD is hidden message. If you uncheck them, whenever you click off the menu, all of a sudden, no more messages. And then, on top of that, you have the camera speed. It's a little bit bugged right now that whenever you're adjusting this, it doesn't actually change the number. That's something that needs to be fixed. Same for the interpolation amount. That also needs to be fixed. But all I can say is, in terms of how interpolation works, is that if you have it really, really high, then your camera is extremely, or the movement and the turning is extremely responsive to what your movement would say. But if you turn it all the way down, it means that then it smoothly transitions into, movement. So I'm holding left, and it slowly gets up to speed. Now letting go, and it still keeps going. It's like adding weight to the camera. And this is how you get the smooth kind of, panning shots and stuff like that. Although do be careful whenever you're messing with this mode, as right now, say if you're turning and going up and down, it can kind of tilt the camera quite a lot, and it could make you a little motion sick. So, as I said, be careful with it. Take your time. Now on to vertical movement speed. This is the only thing in this menu that actually does show an actual change in the number. And that is obviously, for me, whenever I'm going up or down, if I turn it all the way up and I hold down R2, for me it's R2. On a Xbox controller, it would be RT and LT. Hold your elevate button and you go up. Hold your descend button, you go down. Kind of simple to understand. The only reason it's kind of jittery like this right now is because I have a super high speed but very low interpolation. If I were to turn up the interpolation, then it's a lot more responsive in doing that same action. But then, obviously, as you turn it all the way down, it means you just descend and ascend a lot slower. A lot of the time, I like to have it really low down, just because sometimes I want to keep the actual movement. Just keep it on a certain level, and it's very easy to just do tiny little adjustments to keep the elevation instead of just doing huge, vast sweeps across the area. There's also a case where you can hold down your sprint button, whatever you use for your sprint button, and that will increase your speed to actually fly around the map quicker. In show name tags, this will, it should be simple to explain. It'll show your name tag wherever you are, and also the name tags of anyone who's around you. It's useful for finding whoever, finding your character or anybody around you who was in the area. There's also a thing to do with rendering, but that has a bigger part to do with replay mode in itself. It can only actually render in and show you the stuff within a certain radius around you. Lastly, if I want to go into any weather effects, I can go over to, let's say, fog, and then you hit set/reset weather. Hit that, boom, it's foggy. You can only change the weather whenever the actual replay is playing. It's actually forwarding time. But you can do this with anything. It's easier to actually pause it and then, like say if I want it to be overcast, it's easier to do this when paused if you want to keep a scene in a particular way. Scroll it over from fog to overcast, you hit set weather, then you hit play. The fog will go away a little bit slowly because that's just how it is, and a bunch of clouds will roll in. But yeah, this is overcast weather. Same for cloudy. Set it from overcast over into cloudy, hit your little arrow button, hit play, and soon all the clouds will roll in. Let's pause it again, move it over to rain, hit your little arrow button, all the clouds show up when you hit play, and it'll start raining. Move it over to a storm, move it over to storm, hit your little arrow, hit play, and it will start to storm. Listen to the thunder already. Now for snow, second verse, same the first. Move over to snow, hit your little arrow, hit the button, and it'll start to snow. Or maybe not, maybe replay is bugged for rain and snow. But lastly, if you want to get rid of any weather effects and make it just a clear sky, well, move it over to that, hit your little arrow button, then start that, and the sky will clear up. Simples. But now, how about we get into the actual settings of this? This scene right here was pretty much me getting back to the area where I had just died after a huge war while I was playing as Patchy. I ended up turning on the name tags, which, as you can see, is showing names of people who are around me. Oh my. Anyway, I run up to this little area where there are multiple apexes, all dead at the same time. I'll be getting it, I do want to actually make a video on this because I had this fight last night and it was actually insane. It was absolutely insane. It was very fun, but as you can see, it looked like slop. Here's the funny part as well. That wasn't all that was there. There was also a Tyranno Titan here, and there was also an Amaga that was dead over here, but that might be out of render range. Yeah, this'll be a fun one to actually try and make a video on. Oh well. So, into the settings. I am sorry to anybody who may have just jumped a mile. So, onto the settings. So first off, obviously you are going to just want to actually find any sort of scenario or scene that you're actually wanting to capture, whether it be for a screenshot or for I don't know, a video, a little clip that you want to make. So for my example, I want to get just a little screenshot of just my Patchy doing a little pose in front of all of these bodies over here. An easy way to do this, God, the sound for that is very annoying. All the flies, it's just because there's so many bodies on top of each other. That can be a little bit annoying. But either way, easier way to do this is you can go above this little play button and all that and turn down the speed, or you can speed it up if you like. If you slow it down, it'll make it a lot easier for you to actually get like the perfect pose that you actually want for whatever's happening. Oh, the hell is this thing doing? So I found the pose that I wanted to use for actually this little example right here. Just Apache doing an aggro call surrounded by, multiple corpses of a bunch of Tyranno Titans and Rexes. Sounds cool to me. A little dramatic, but oh well. That leads us into the first section of this entire thing, which is the camera. Now, as obviously, you have zoom right here. Should be pretty simple to explain. You push it in, and it zooms in the camera, meaning that things that are further away ends up actually looking bigger. But don't forget how far away you are from this actual, thing that you're trying to capture. But it doesn't just do that. It also makes it so that the cone, or, your line of sight, your field of view is actually thinner. So right now, if you look on the left and right side, you have the trees on the left and you have a bunch of trees on the right, and in the center is my Patchy, and as you zoom it in, well, they all disappear and all you can really see is stuff in the distance, a couple of bushes, and obviously my Patchy. This also has the effect of making things that are up close look a lot bigger than the things in the back, than they already are in the first place. And you can adjust this to however you want. Whether you want your things in the back to, be really focused, or if you want things in the front to take the center stage. Let's also change the time of day just to, I don't know, make things look a little bit more presentable. So let's start off with aperture. They've kind of changed how aperture works in a way that it only works if you have, focal distance actually active, which I will get into focal distance a little bit later, but for now I've just set it on like the lowest setting that I can at the moment. But what aperture actually does is, whether you want to increase it or decrease it, it affects how detailed you want something to actually look in the distance or depending on how up close it is. So let's say I'm up close to my patchy, for some reason I have that looking really weird. But if I were to turn down the aperture, what that would do is it would make anything over in the distance or behind the patchy look very, very blurry. And I keep doing that. Anything in the distance will look very, very blurry, whereas the patchy still stays in focus, mainly due to focal distance actually still being active. But as I start to actually ramp it up now, the stuff in the back will come, more into focus. This will come into effect with, focal distance, which is in the depth of field tab, but, you know, it should be easy to actually understand. The higher this is, the more stuff in the background will actually come into detail. Now, as for diaphragm blades, this mainly happens whenever you have, anything that actually casts off a light ray. And a lot of the time, whenever you are actually in replay mode, you may actually see a bunch of, like, maybe like circles or pentagrams, or maybe not pentagrams, pentagons or hexagons. Basically, this will make those pentagons or hexagons, they'll add more edges to them. And at 16, everything pretty much almost looks like a perfect circle in terms of those reflective light rays that they try to do. Usually you'll only ever see it on water surfaces or anything reflective really, but I can't really seem to actually get a good example for this right now. As for max aperture stop, I don't know what it does. But all I can say is I haven't really needed to know what it does. Maybe if anybody, I would love to think that anybody who actually, works on the replay mode in Alderon, I would love to think that they actually watch these videos. But I would love for anybody to tell me what max aperture actually does. I haven't needed to use it, but I'd still like to know. So I can't tell you what that does, to be honest. So now for, what I think is the most important tab, which is depth of field. And so we'll start off with focal distance. So what focal distance does is you pick how far away from the camera you want the actual, detailed part of whatever you're trying to capture to be. So in this example, I have the patchy on the left right here. Here's a little arrow for it. And that pretty much creates then, depending on whatever your focal distance is like a ring of detail. And depending on how far that, your focal distance is set, will change how far that ring is pushed out. So anything within the area that you're actually seeing right now, that is what's actually being focused on and having the most amount of detail. In which then we end up getting into sensor width. And what sensor width does is it either grows or shrinks that focal distance. It makes it thinner or wider. God, this is actually a really good scene right here. I love this. But anyway, so let's say I found whatever focal distance is right here for my camera. I've set it on so that this Rex on the floor is really in detail, my patchy is really in detail, but anything beyond that is starting to lose a little bit of detail. So I have ended up finding what distance I need to actually, get a good amount of focus on, say, this Rex on the floor or my patchy. And right now that seems to be 1,100 units, like in-game units. And so by increasing the sensor width, I'm closing how much area is actually being in focus. As you can see, as it increases, stuff around it is getting tighter and tighter towards the focal point until it's mainly my patchy that's in focus. This is also really helpful for actually finding how, finding where your focal point is actually going to be. As, the more you turn it down, the more stuff that comes into focus. The more you turn it up, the less stuff that gets into focus. It also increases the amount of blurriness of stuff in the background. God, that is, that looks like a fever dream right there. But now, let's say we don't want an insane amount of blurriness on everything. We want a lot of the stuff in this area right here to actually be in a decent amount of detail, okay? But everything in the background, all those trees and, the mountain in the background, that's kind of, let's just say that's not what we want. In which now we can get into depth blur distance and depth blur radius. And so let's say that depth blur distance ends up creating almost like a pane of glass in front of the camera, okay, at a certain distance. And this number just sets, just controls how far away from the camera that pane of glass actually is. And what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to actually work with the depth blur radius in which you can control how blurry you want to make that pane of glass by turning either up or down. As I turn it up, the stuff in the background gets more and more and more blurry. And as I turn it down, that stuff in the background starts to come a little bit more into focus, or a little bit more detail as you can see it changing. But let's say this is a good amount of blurriness that we want. But I want, I want it to be a little bit more further away from my patchy. This is another very annoying bug right now that every so often, especially on console, if you're on PC, you're fine, you can just use a mouse to do it. But for console, you have to go over to Aberration, and you want to actually change numbers individually instead of them being in like increments of 5, 10, or 100. So you can go over to Aberration, and then you go down, and it'll reset the actual thing right off the bat. That is incredibly frustrating. Thankfully, we do remember what the actual, the number that we were on for it originally. But let's say, anyway, that we want to push that pane of glass that makes things blurry a little further back so that the trees that are kind of a little closer up have a little bit more detail to them. But with my analogy of depth blur distance being like a pane of glass that makes things blurry, controlled by the radius and the distance. If we want the stuff that's a little, a little closer to us to actually be a little bit more in focus, but not insanely in focus, then we can push that pane of glass a little further back, which moves some of the objects that were behind that pane of glass, well, no longer behind that pane of glass, making them super blurry. And you can move this to however far you want, and obviously the stuff that is closer up will end up being affected, whereas the stuff that's further away won't be affected. It all depends on how you want it to actually look, of course. You can change this independently yourself if you want by, changing the number specifically to how you want. Like, say right now, I ended up setting it to 3. I ended up doing a little cut because it's very buggy. But anyway, I set it to 3, and a lot of the trees are very, very blurry, and I can change that how I wish in terms of the intensity of how blurry it is by reducing the radius, which is affecting the strength of that pane of glass, making things blurry. But, lower the number, the closer that pane of glass, the further away that pane of glass. It's a really weird analogy, but that's the only way I can explain it. I'm sorry, I hope it makes sense. Now, as for aberration. What aberration does is it kind of separates the colors from everything right here. I don't know if you all remember going to see like a 3D movie and maybe you took off, the 3D glasses and then all these colors were stretched out. You got the reds, blues, and greens. But that's pretty much what aberration does. And what offset does is it kind of turns it into a vignette. what I mean from that is it'll make the things in the center, it'll like make the center clear while then leaving the edges still aberrationized or aberrated. However you want to say that, I don't care. And obviously, you can use this for more dramatic effect in whatever kind of scenario you're wanting. Like right here, kind of looks a little cool, a little dramatic. I would want a little less aberration right here. Actually, I'd want a lot less aberration right here. As you can see on the corners of the screen, I can bring that in a little bit, and we have quite a dramatic kind of scene right here. Especially with the Rex's toe in the bottom right. It's all stretched out, and the colors are a little mottled with it. It's cool. Then we have exposure bias. This pretty much just controls lighting. Be careful with it. You could go a little bit silly. For me personally, I don't like to go a little bit too insane with it. I like to, a lot of the time, especially with a thumbnail, going too dark will just get you like no clicks because, we like bright colors in terms of things that attract us and get our attention. But obviously, if you want a more dramatic kind of scene, you drop down that, and then you can increase the saturation in a different software if you like. It all depends on what you actually want, right? Whether you want a dramatic kind of scene, something that's eye-catching, something that, gets your attention. Yeah, it's all just preference. And then rendering. Super easy to actually explain. We only have two settings right here, which is vignette, in which that just adds a shadow encroaching from the corner, the corners of the screen or the edges of the screen inwards. It works well with some aberration to maybe add a little bit more dramaticism to whatever scene you're trying to, capture, or you can just leave it out. As I said, you can decide the intensity or the strength of it, all down to preference, depending on whatever you're trying to make. For me, this looks pretty good. And lastly, we have bloom. What this does is wherever the original light source is, it'll increase the intensity of the light on whatever surface in whatever direction that light source is actually coming from. So say on the Rex right here, you can see those light rays hitting that Rex, and it's becoming almost enshrouded in a ray of light. Same with the back of my Patchy's head right there, chrome dome. Actually, this looks pretty good. I like this. This is cool. I don't usually use a high amount of bloom. I like it. I like it a lot. But I think I would need a bit more of a vignette. Maybe shift over to the left a little bit more. Yeah, that looks good to me. And here we have the final screenshot for this. But next up, I actually want to show you just a little trick to make any kind of scene super, super easy. I'll just give you the blanket details of what I do for pretty much most of my screenshots. It's super easy, anybody can do it, and it works on pretty much almost any scene to make a decent screenshot. So anybody who's interested, I had a video of playing as a Nanotyrannus or just a baby Rex the other day. And I ended up getting chased by a Tyrannotitan, and I got, yeah, you get where I'm coming from. I'm being chased, they're gonna try and kill me, blah blah blah. So I'm just gonna use the baby Rex for this example. So, with everyone's favorite dino being a Rex, here you go. So what we have here, simple. I've zoomed in a little bit, I've gone to depth of field, I found my focal distance for this, I lowered down my depth blur distance, increased my sensor width up to about 5, and then I increased my depth blur radius up to whatever number I want. If you want it to be a little bit easier, you can change the number down to like 2. And boom. Instant screenshot. Where the main thing that's in focus is, well, the main target of what you're trying to actually get well, the main interest point of whatever picture you're trying to make. Then you can change the lighting to look how you want. And then it's all about just finding the kind of angle that you want. Obviously, this, I don't know what it is. Baby Rexes just don't look that good, do they? But either way, the principle is still the same in terms of, you could literally copy these settings in depth of field right here, and it would kind of work on any situation you want. The only difference you would have to make is really just how far away or how close, your focal distance is going to be. Chuck on a little vignette right here, change the exposure. Whoa, that was way too high. A little aberration right here, make that up, exaggerate a little bit, and then pull that away from your main interest point, which is, your baby Rex. Everyone loves the baby Rex. And boom, screenshot. Maybe intensify that, the vignette a little bit, increase the bloom a little bit, boom, screenshot. Doesn't look that great, but I don't think baby Rex looks that great. You might have a different opinion. Oh well. As for the main things that kind of bother me when using replay mode, as you can see in the distance, you can see those really sharp lines. This has something to do with how the game actually renders or does the blending, or I've always called it blending, like map blending or depth of field blending. Now, in a perfect world, we wouldn't be able to see those mountains in the distance, outside of the map pretty much. Those would just be, we'd only just see fog. We wouldn't even know they were there unless, we could see them right there. The only way you'd actually be able to see them is if you're high enough, as you can see right here. And this only happens, this kind of thing, whenever you're actually looking away from the center of the map. And this annoys me to no end. You have no idea. So let's say we're in Savannah. I don't know why it's green, it just is. And I use focal distance, and then I turn up my sensor width super high. As you can see, there's really sharp lines on the mountains, and you can see the mountains in the distance very faintly just because of the coloration of the sky. But then as soon as we start looking a little closer towards the center of the map, as you saw, those mountains actually, they blurred out. It's really weird, but I said this for so long, and this will continue to stay blurred out until you look further away from the center of the map again. In which, look, that's the Wilderness Peak mountain right there. And super sharp. Fuzzy, sharp. Fuzzy, sharp. And so now here I am in Flyer's Bluff, or right next to the Teeth, or Burnt Forest, wherever you want to say. Let's say I look out to sea, I've got these trees right here. And if I turn up my sensor width, removing the focus, as you can see, these trees are still perfectly sharp, as you can see right here. They have no detail to them, but they are super sharp. And as I look a little further inland, you can see the mountain of, Hunter's Thicket over there, super sharp, but then I look a little closer to the center of the map, and boom, all blurry. And then as I continue my turning, boom, sharp all over again. But let's get on the other side of these trees, shall we? What happens if all of a sudden we're looking at the center of the map with these trees? Boom! They're all blurry because we're looking towards the center of the map and not away from the center of the map. I don't know what the angle is that's needed for this, but I really hope they fix it eventually in the future. This has ruined so many screenshots and thumbnails. You have no idea. It has ruined so many. Obviously, it's not a super high priority kind of thing, because it's just, detail rendering, in which most of the player base only actually runs around in one area of the map anyway, so they won't even see most of this. But to me, I enjoy it. I like it. So obviously, it just bothers me, because I'm interested, right? Another example, Stego Mountain. I look away from the center of the map, boom, super sharp rocks on the edges right here. But if I move around to the other side, boom, all blurry again. I think I've shown you enough examples. I'm just beating a dead horse right here. Or should I say I'm beating a dead Iggy. Save me the thumb. So for example, right here, we have this tree. We are looking away from the center of the map. But then if we move the cover of this tree, and let's say we put Red Island behind it, it's now actually rendering it in the way that it's supposed to be. But as you can see on the top of the tree, it's still got the actual outside of the map. It hasn't got an object behind it to actually hide that effect. And so it's just bugged out, and it actually has, well, those sharp details that it shouldn't have. Another way around this is if your camera is higher than the thing you're wanting to focus on, then you can look down at your target and, well, that makes things a lot easier. But sometimes you don't want to do that. You want to look up, but you want that thing that's in front of you to also still be super blurry, but that ain't happening with this bug. Because it has no actual physical object behind it so that that effect can actually work. Even in a forest, it's a problem, as you can see. You can't really look up in a forest. Otherwise, with a high amount of blur. Otherwise, this is what you see. It's it's a pain in the ass. I can't get the sky and have it look good for this. But if I look in the center of the map, I can make this I can make this stick look amazing of all things. Behold, the stick of the stick of destiny, or the stick of truth if anyone's played the South Park game. But last example for making a quick little screenshot. Turn off my little, messages right here. Turn down my interpolation a little bit. Turn down my vertical movement speed. Find out where I am right at this moment. I'm over here in the water, near the water. So here I am right now. And so I think this is actually a pretty decent pose. So now that I think this is actually a decent pose with a decent background, but because I'm looking away from, I'm looking out towards the edge of the map, I know I'm gonna get that bug. So what I can do now is I can pull away. I can zoom in to shorten that field of view, then push in to a good amount. I can then find my focal distance. So that's where my focal distance is right now. I can turn down my depth blur distance. I can decrease my sensor width a little bit. I might want that a little bit higher right now. Or lower, should I say. So set that to like 2. They're a little bit in detail. Cool. Depth blur distance at 5. Then I stretch this out. Okay, so remember what I said about the pane of glass? They're not being affected, the Spinos aren't, so what I want to do is I want to bring that pane of glass closer to me, so let's set that maybe to 3. Okay, maybe? Okay, yeah, they're being affected. That's cool. Vignette. Nice little vignette, a little bit of dramaticism. Add a little bit of bloom, let's see how that goes. Okay, it's got a good amount of shrouding over those Spinos right there. Last but not least, if you want to include everything in this, add a little bit of chromatic aberration, a little bit offset, so that Dennis isn't being chromatically aberrated. That's a little dramatic. God, look at his eyes. He looks so excited. And then, if you want, you can actually tinker with the aperture a little bit. And this pretty much has the same effect as sensor width. So closing up, closing the space that is in focus. But the thing with aperture and sensor width is that aperture does it a lot more subtly or in much smaller increments. You can get a lot more control with aperture. I still do not know what the max aperture does though. It's really weird. But either way, we ended up finding a good kind of middle ground with sensor width and aperture right there. So that's a bit too much right there. So what I can do if I want to fine tune it is increase the aperture a little bit and find the middle ground. Maybe set that to, yeah, okay. That looks alright. And I think that's good enough. It's simple enough. Maybe a little bit more vignette. Ah, wait, no, I want a little bit more lighting. Do I want a bit more lighting? It doesn't change it immediately every time. It's more like it does it in increments just to actually, save your eyeballs. Otherwise, yeah, it's just going to do really sharp changes and that can cause some eye issues. Especially for anybody with photosensitive epilepsy. So be careful with that. But yeah, that looks alright. And so here we are at the end. I actually had more fun than I thought I would making this. I'm usually not a big guide kind of video kind of guy, just because I don't really want to tell someone how they should do something, but at least with this kind of thing, there is actual objective, it's not really something that can just be interpreted wrongly and then still come out to the same kind of outcome, really. It's more like, it works this way, and if you do it this way, and you understand it in this way, then you'll get the result you wanted. There's no real factors outside of how it's done to actually maybe skew you off of the result that you're actually wanting. Other than, of course, how you want the result to be in the end. So, yeah. All I can say, really, is I hope it helped and I hope you understood it. If not, well... well, I obviously didn't do my job well enough, did I? Then, in that case, if I didn't explain it well enough. But for what it's worth, I hope I explained it well enough and it does make sense, and I hope, well, you have fun with it. It's all on you now, just to tinker with it, using what you understood from this, and have fun with it. I'm looking forward to looking in the Discord, game screenshots channel in the Discord. I check in there pretty much almost every day. There's some really good screenshots in there that people put up. But anyway, I hope this helped. I hope you enjoyed. And I hope you all have a lovely day. Bye.